All right, we went a little bit over. We had a lot of articles here because I I was gone for a couple weeks. But let's talk about our main subject, and that is this. I went to San Francisco, like I said, to VMworld, and before I went to VMworld, I got an email. I said, "Hey," and the email said, "Hey, we've got a podcast booth that's set up. Would you like to reserve some time in the podcast booth?" Now, this is not the first time I've seen that. But I'm finding that a lot of non-techie conference, that's a technical conference, yeah. But I'm finding even non-techie conferences are starting to think about this. Smaller conferences are starting to think about podcast booths. Being able to bring somebody aside because you're there at the conference, they're there at the conference, setting up a recorder, whether it be through your phone, whether it be through a recording system, or whatnot. And in some of these cases, they're actually giving you an area with a mixer and 2 microphones. And you just basically plug in your recorder. You plug in maybe your computer. If you're doing video, you plug in the camera. And you do your show. And you do your one-on-one interviews with people that you don't normally get to see on a day-to-day basis. And you don't want to do it over the interwebs. So with this, I'm finding, and you know, podcasting has always been a part. It is, as long as you had a device to record, you could always do a podcast, audio version podcast or video version podcast at any show. So it's amazing that, you know, some of these conferences are realizing, hey, we've got to have these booths so people don't have to lug big gear. They can make a show that actually sounds maybe even better than what they produce, and make them realize, hey, you know, maybe we should up our podcast game and get some of this equipment. Gives them a chance to test out new equipment. Like, for instance, the Podcaster Pro. A lot of people haven't gotten a chance to try that, and some of these shows have Podcaster Pros there now, so you can pop in your SD card, hit that record button, do your conversation, stop it, pull out the SD card, and then put it in your computer wherever you need to go. So with that, you have a lot more option. And you don't have to lug all this equipment. You can still do it the old-fashioned. You can still take your equipment. I'm still taking my equipment. But, you know, if you don't have the best equipment, you know, and, you know, have old mics or anything like that, you don't want to shove those into people's faces. You want to sit down in front of a table and have a conversation. You can do that. It's amazing where podcasting is going, because it's got such little overhead in setup. Because I could probably rent out a storefront, put up a podcast booth, which is a table, 2 microphones, a mixer, and a place to plug in your computer, and then rent it out. And then people can come there and do their shows there. Then have that studio at home like I have, because they don't have room for that studio. And it has all the soundproofing in it. The rooms, you know, they don't bleed from one show to another, so you can have like multiple podcast areas, and really bring in some great talent and record shows for yourself. Have other people rent it out, say, you know, $10 for a half hour, depending on where you are, of course. And you can go in, you sit down, you have your podcast. Maybe even set it up so the phone line, it's easy call access. So if you do need to call somebody and you don't have that option at home to do that, you can easily go to one of these incubating type podcast areas. But conferences, you know, you go to. It's very important to actually go to a conference in your field. And this is whether you work at a 9-to-5 job or whether you're independent or whatever. It's always a good idea to get out to something, whether it's a local conference or a regional conference or a national or even international conference, to find out what's going on in your world. Whether it's IT, whether it's accounting, whether it's HR, whether it's customer service. There's shows for all of them, and all of them are putting together podcast booths. So if you do have a show, you can set up times and talk with people and get them on your show. Sound bites, full episodes, fun clips, bloopers, everything like that. all of the stuff it's perfect. And being able to do that from a conference and getting people, like I said, that you don't normally get to interact with on a regular basis, it's amazing. And that's how I got to interview Steve Wozniak. That's how I got to interview Adrian Grenier. That's how I got to interview, you get the idea. South by Southwest, I've interviewed many, many, many celebrity because I go out to the show, conference. I brought my gear, yeah, but, eventually South by South, I'm surprised South by Southwest doesn't have a podcast room. Maybe they do, and I just haven't found it yet. And then bring that in so people can sit down, podcast. They do have a media room. And in that, the news media, because I do have press, and in back of the press room, there is an area where you can go and do your podcast, but they don't have the equipment set up for that. So, I don't know. It's awesome to think on how podcasting can really take things to the next level. And putting it having it in conferences is great for the conference because that brings you there more than it brings you there for the people. But now you have an avenue to interview some of these people, and they're willing to give you schedule time to interview. It's win-win situation. So if you do not go to conferences and you're a podcaster, think about it. Dragon Con was just this last week, and I know Todd Cochran and Rob Greenlee took the new media show to Dragon Con, and they had shows at Dragon Con. Now that's just a visual experience to begin with. But doing it live, you bring people in, and maybe or doing it in a booth, you still bring people in, you get people interested in your show. And that's the key right there, is to really bring people to your show. So, lots of people will watch. Yeah, maybe they'll give you 1-star review, but maybe they'll give you a 5-star review. And maybe they'll become your regular listeners. And maybe they will also comment on your shows and interact. And then all of a sudden you go, oh my goodness, whereas before nobody was coming back and talking to me, I've got tons of people doing that now. You see? It's just that win-win situation. So I could go on forever about that, but I'm definitely going over on time. So, yeah. So what do you do? First of all, I'll put out that question. Do you go to conferences to a podcast? And don't think outside the box like I always do. And just because the conference, let's say it's a local conference that comes to your town, there's always somebody that you can interview that fits into your niche. Even if your niche is basket weaving, there's always going to be somebody there that you can interview that works for your podcast. I guarantee it. I'd be surprised if it didn't happen, but you do have to look for it sometimes. So even if the show's in town or close to a major city, an hour drive or something like that, do it. Even if you're there for the day, do it and get a couple sound bites and talk to a couple people, and then put that in your show. And you find that brings a lot more. Make sure when you do interview these people, make sure you have their Twitter handle, make sure you have their Facebook handle, Instagram, all that other stuff. So when you post it, you're saying, okay, follow this person, and then tweet about it with this person, and so they see it, and maybe they'll tweet you back. Don't always expect that, but maybe they'll tweet you back, and then all of a sudden you're growing your audience. That's a great organic way to grow audience.